Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nofal Janebi. I am the director of Emirates Center for Happiness Research. We are located in United Arab Emirates University. A part of our research center mandate is to promote knowledge around well-being, mental health for different population. And today we thought it would be ideal to speak about well-being, happiness, the concept itself among medical students, and those who provide health services for people that we admire, people that we think they will make us happier, and they do sometimes. But then if they keep providing happiness and providing interventions for people to promote their well-being, they will be exhausted by end of the day. And we're delighted to have with us Sara Al Dallal, who doesn't like to call her a doctor, but she's a doctor. I'm telling you, that's why we've asked her to come and give you today's session. So Dr. Sara Al Dallal is the president of Emirates Health Economic Society. She's one of the pioneer Emirati women advocate for promoting mental health in different aspects. And how the session will work out today. So the first, Dr. Sara will provide her insight, and you guys are more than welcome to comment in the chat box, in the Q&A. You can also share your thoughts by voice by using the raise hand option, and we will give you the privilege to unmute yourself and share your insight, of course. Just a quick note for people who are attending this session from UAE University. If you're a staff member and you want your training hours to be calculated, we will post a link where you have to sign up in that particular link. Without it, the hours will not be counted. So make sure to have an eye open on the chat box before the end of today's session. Dr. Sara, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. No, for this kind introduction. I am so happy to be today back in my, let's say, in my virtual space in my university that I graduated from, the UAE University. And I'm so happy that we have students from and even attendees from different places attending today. Thank you for the kind introduction. And I'll be sharing the screen now. So I would love, by the time I share my screen, that everyone around the room, if we can think about it, it's a virtual room, that they can introduce themselves in the chat box. If not introduce themselves, at least just tell us how old are they, or something they would like to share with the others today, if they would love to do so. So we'll be waiting for that until I'll be having my screen on full display. So I'm not sure if somebody is dropping anything in the chat box, or are you able to see my screen by this point?
We're able to see your screen. Let's see the first brave soul who would share.
It seems that we will, yeah,
oh, we do have
yeah.
Oh, so the chat box is disabled. Thank you, Alia, for pointing out. We always have been struggling with this setting. So you can actually share in the Q&A, please.
So yes, we would love to hear the Q&A. What do you think? What would you like to share with us? Thank you, Alia, for bringing this up. How old are you? Where are you from? What would you like to tell us? Or at least, oh, you're 17, Selma. Hi, Selma. So where are you from? Where are you staying? And are you feeling happy today? So a bit of a background about me, since we're seeing our participants really getting engaged in the Q&A box. I am a medical doctor by profession. So I graduated from UAE University College of Medicine and Health Sciences. And as of present, I am the president of Emirates Health Economic Society. So there is an element of health and economics. It's a new field. And how does this relate to happiness and well-being? This is what we will discuss within this session. But Riyam have just mentioned her name. Hi, Riyam. And there's a PhD student who's originally from Jordan. Hi, Saja, Dr. Saja. And today have been really busy. Yes, Alia. So I hope, Alia, you will find it refreshing that we will be discussing today about happiness. So if you have anything that comes to your mind, do you think doctors in general, medical doctors, are happy people? Are they happy when you go and meet them? So, and do you think they understand the concept of happiness? That's what we will discover today. But usually, when you visit a doctor, are you happy when you go and visit a doctor? Are you a doctor or a dentist? Whatever you would love to think about. Do you feel that you're going there and you're honestly, no, I'm stressed. So there are certain things, like usually you don't pair happiness or the feeling of being happy going to a doctor, even if sometimes you get out of that doctor's visit and you feel like you are quite satisfied. You thought that there must be something bigger than what you had in mind. Is that so? So let's think about how we define happiness. And if you can write down in the chat box, what is happiness to you? Is happiness being always in a smiley face? Do you think that I am currently happy talking to you, or I am not happy? Because I am so happy that somebody in the chat box or in the Q&A box have mentioned that they're stressed. Could you be stressed and happy at the same time? Could you have multiple emotions at the same time? That is something that is so Alia mentioned that being content with yourself and enjoying your time is being happy. Is there something else that somebody can join Alia with and really mention if what is happiness is all about? Is a state of peaceful mind. It's endorphins. Dr. Abdullah Al-Kindi, again, that's a big words of having endorphins as an answer. So there is that self thing when it comes to happiness. I haven't heard in the chat box yet, or read in the chat box, is that when you see others being happy, you feel happy. It's something that is internal. I assume from the answers that we got so far, and it is being satisfied with yourself. It seems that everybody's talking about satisfaction, being content, having something to do with your brain chemicals and having endorphins kick in. So if somebody knows more about endorphins, please type them in the Q&A box. But as per the regular definition in a dictionary by Merriam-Webster, which is a very common dictionary that you can find on Google, there's only 3 definitions for happiness. I was shocked, to be honest. I thought that there will be much more, but it's a state of well-being and contentment. And somebody have mentioned in the Q&A box that it's that satisfaction feeling, that kind of contentment, that you're feeling good with yourself. And if you see number 3, it's good fortune and prosperity. Now, that is something that it needs to be mentioned. Maybe for some people, it's not only about the state that they are being in, but fortune, luck, prosperity, something to do maybe with financial aspect, can drive happiness. So, so these are the definitions for happiness per se. But which one do you agree with the most? From the chat box I have, or from the Q&A box, I think most of the people are going with number 1, or number 1 and 2 to a certain degree, but I haven't heard the term of fortune or prosperity. Do you think the fortune and prosperity comes later on in life, or it's something that is outdated? That is something to be discussed in a while. So there's a quote, and if you would like to see all about these quotes and where these quotes come from, you can Google quotes about happiness, and you will find, I'm telling you, hundreds and hundreds quotes about happiness. But since the discussion came about, and the chat box have mentioned that happiness is more about yourself, Mahatma Gandhi have mentioned a quote which I would like to share it with everyone. And there is a synchrony, it seems, that he keeps it as a level of what is happiness in his own perspective. And is just what you think, what you say, and what you do have to be synchronized. So you cannot be thinking in a way, saying something else, and doing the other thing that may result in happiness. So all these three things is the way you think, is the brain, and the way you project and say certain things and how you act on it is where happiness lies. Please tell us if you are agreeing with Mahatma Gandhi on this concept, and if it makes sense to you. It can apply. And for Dr. Abdullah Al-Kindi, he mentioned something in the Q&A box that is saying somebody who's doing good, um, and he believes in that, he will live a satisfied life or a happy life. So it's more or less going around the same concept, which is Mahatma Gandhi saying. So if you're doing something good, and you believe in it, which is the thinking part, then you are in synchrony, you're acting upon your beliefs, then you're happy. Now we don't, you have to, the thing is, you have to think about it is that you're doing something good or beneficial. Otherwise, if you're doing evil, then then probably you are happy, but that means that you're not making other people's happy. And this is a different debate. But if you are, let's say, if somebody is an evil person, and if they're thinking in that synchronized matter, then they are happy doing evil stuff. So with Alia have mentioned that when you do and say thing, it leads because there is a sense of achievement. There is some sense of achievement when you're happy, is that you want to be yourself. And happiness is, as mentioned by Kumar, is contagious. So let's go on with the second slide. Has anyone before seen the scale or the happiness scale? I think many people have seen it. Yeah, when you are doing surveys or when you're going somewhere or it's online, this scale is all over the place. So it just shows you when you're dissatisfied or you're satisfied with the service, for example, or you're happy. Do you think the green bars represent happiness? And is a small smile or a big smile make a difference? So is happiness a transient state? Can you be more happy or less happy? Can you be more greener? Is there any a darker vision than this green that you are seeing in front of you? This is something yet to be discussed, and it is very wide and varied from one place to the other. So scales are there to show you that what is the extent of being happy, but it could be much more. You could be much more happier, and there will not be a scale for that. And this also depends with psychology. Sometimes there are certain things that you cannot put it on paper, or you cannot even put it in a scale format because it cannot be described. Now, I'm not sure if many of you have or came across the World Happiness Report. There's an organization which typically on a yearly basis, they produce surveys on happiness. And this year in 2022, they have marked their 10-year anniversary. So they were found 10 years ago that existed pre-pandemic, and they were looking into different countries and they produced different multiple reports on happiness. And with this year and throughout the last years, they looked at happiness and how it have changed throughout the last few years. And they're looking at lives in the last for more than 150 countries worldwide. If somebody has seen this report, please inform me and please keep it in the chat box below. The report is quite extensive and it has multiple pages. And I'm trying to bridge what is the part where there's health with the report itself. And in this year's report, we have seen that there is a chapter dedicated, which was not previously mentioned in previous years, or maybe it was tackled one way or the other, where they explore the biological basis of happiness. And biology is what happens in the body. And it has nothing to do with health per se, but they looked at the genetics and the sense of well-being. And there is a full dedicated chapter where they discuss that. And it is a very good chapter if you looked at it. But if you look at all of that, people who have contributed to this chapter, none of them are, in fact, or indeed, working in the healthcare field or doctors or anything of that sort. They're researchers and they're looking at the psychology and the genetics field. And from there, in that chapter, they have said, okay, if you're a happier person or happiness have to do with something to do with your genetics. So 30 to 40% in differences between the genes can really differentiate if some people are more happier than the others. Could you imagine that could be a part or a factor? They looked at twins and they looked at people who are twins and because basically twins are identical. Twins are, when it comes to their genes, they're quite identical. And they looked at even other individuals in the same setup, and they looked at their genetic preferences and their genetic makeup, and also their outlook to life and their well-being and their happiness. And they saw that genes do play a role, but only to 30 to 40% of that. But there are certain other factors that also play a role when it comes to happiness. And if somebody could relate, can you please drop it down in your Q&A box? Can you tell me if in your family at home, since most of you will be sharing the same genes, I'm not saying identical genes if you're not having a twin, is there somebody in the family itself more happier than the other? And what are they characterized with? If you have a sibling that is happier than the others, and we're talking about, let's say, somebody in their adolescent ages or even as an adult, what is the difference between you and the others? And can you please relate that to their environmental influences? Because maybe in one home, you are subjected to the same environmental influences. Your genes are a bit different to a slight degree, but there's always that one happy-go-lucky person in the house that is much more happier than the others. And sometimes even they went maybe through much more challenging or difficult circumstances that are different than the others. So in the report itself, they also looked at people who are single versus people who are married. And I don't want to start the debate about marriage or not marriages, but I mean, being in a married relationship, it has a different change. It has a different environmental interaction where people are subjected to be living with another individual and be sharing certain values and principles in a certain place. And as you can see, men and women differ, and single men to married men have differ. And you can see that the makeup itself And by the way, the study was done in the Netherlands. So we have to keep that also in context, that this single man and the genetic influences is different, and the result that there is a gene to environmental interaction about the perception of happiness, and how I really do recommend you to read uh, um, the report online, and to say and to look at how these differences do differ in general. Now, the report itself also looks at different countries, and they rank countries which are among the most happiest countries from the least happiest countries. And as you can see in the top 20, none of the countries that they have surveyed have basically been an Arab country. There is a Middle Eastern country in between, but the rest, there are non Arab or non Arab countries. At number 21, you can see Bahrain, and one can think, okay, well, how did they come to this conclusion? They have ranked these countries based on these six or seven factors, as you can see on the left-hand side of this of the slide. And it's looking at dystopia, perceptions of corruptions, generosity, freedom of making life choices. Healthy life expectancy is one of those, social supports, and GDP per capita, which is the gross domestic product per capita. And these are, and they have surveyed multiple, it's a questionnaire. And based on that, as you can see, the top three, they have the same or similar kind of fabric, which is the Scandinavian countries, or the Northern European countries, that they have some similarities where they might be sharing some similar values and concepts, and that's why they're coming at the top three or four countries. And as you go down, you are seeing maybe also clusters of similar countries that are similar in thoughts and similar in upbringing. But as you can see, for example, the United States of America, or maybe others in that rank, they have higher GDPs, where they spend more, where it comes to the financial status of that country is not even contributing to the countries or the rank at a higher level. Maybe Finland is having a more healthier life expectancy than the United States, which I'm not sure, don't quote me, but they may be living longer and they are living more healthier on in general. So that's why it's keeping points down there. So it's also, when we were talking about the definition about fortune and having prosperity, this is one attribute of happiness, but it doesn't rank. When it comes to rankings, it may differ from one country to the other country. So I don't know if this is making sense to you, but let's deep down dive to that and think about how we can define from happiness from one nation to another nation. So it's totally different. What maybe Finnish people define happiness is different than Americans when they define happiness. This is a study that was done in 2016, and it's a very interesting study if you would like to know how do nations define happiness. But I took some captions, or they have laid these countries that they have studied. And if you see, they have looked at India, the northern part versus the southern part. So they didn't group India in one part. They have divided India in two parts, the northern part and the southern part. And they have taken different countries and from different places, and they have done a massive study. And they have, as you can see, they have looked at different parameters of what is the definitions of happiness in different countries. Like if you see Mexico and Argentina and Brazil, they are coming from the Southern American subcontinent, but they're totally different when you're looking at Norway and Croatia, just looking at it in that perspective. But if you see Portugal and Italy, They might be closer in geographical subcontext, but they might be sharing something else, but there are maybe different in some ways to Croatia and Hungary, which are also in the European Union or in Europe. So you can see that they have looked at different countries, looked at different different definitions, where it looked at the psychological definitions of being in a state of contentment, also to health, to work, to standard of living, to spirituality, and to other interpersonal relationships like having friends and whatnot. And as you can see, even when you look at northern India and southern India, we will look and deep delve to each one of them. And whatever you see in that brackets, it means, if you see an asterisk within the brackets, it means mostly that it's of significance. So it is statistically significant. And if you can see, there are certain areas where, for example, Hungary, they really look at how, or Croatia and Hungary, they really promote health as being parts of their definition of happiness, unlike others. So others, they might be looking at interpersonal relationship or spirituality. So when we're looking at this part, they have mapped it, the researchers have mapped it differently. So for example, if you see southern India at the bottom of this, or at the bottom right-hand side of this quadrant, of the four quadrant things, and they really do look at spirituality differently than the rest. So they do think that happiness is when you are more spiritual, or you're more related to your spirituality, rather than northern India, where they think their interpersonal relationships and family more highly more highly respected, and that's what they define their definition of happiness. So you can see in one country, it's totally different. And even in certain areas, you see clusters. Now we can see Hungary, as we mentioned, health is something that they really look at, and relationships may not be much more. But if you look back at where you think about Italians, Mexicans, Brazilians, Portuguese people, they really look at psychological definitions and being the sense of content and having daily situations and having that standards of living, the laid back standards of living, and the relationships are much more on their definitions of being happy. Now, again, I'm mentioning that this study was done in 2016. If you have visited one of those countries, please tell me if that's something that you have sensed it, and that you have sensed that this is what they really do value as part of their happiness and as part of their lives. Now, this is a title that is really to be looked at, and Dr. Abdullah have mentioned something in the Q&A box. There are different definitions of happiness, but is there one true happiness? No, I think there is not one size to fit all, and this is what the research have been saying. This is one research that I have displayed, but it's totally different. Older generation, they value money or prosperity, other than for example, Gen Zs, Gen X, or millennials. The happiness definition really do matter differently across generations, and the expectations and the sense of achievements and the sense of acceptance is totally different. Now, do you agree that money does buy happiness? Please just mention it in the chat box, because this is a study that was done in the US, and it's a survey of well-being in the US. And as you can see, as you are paid more, or you are earning more, or you're saving more, the general sense of well-being is much more higher. Now, I couldn't find any other study in other countries in this way, that they have broken it down by annual income with their sense of well-being. And it's not only the sense of well-being that as you go higher, the sense of well-being is getting higher and higher. But if you see the breakdown, also, like if you're earning 400K per year versus 625K per year, the sense of well-being is not that, like, there is a sense of, like, if you reach a certain level, you may plateau. The sense of well-being and happiness may plateau at certain age. And as you can see, as if you're earning 137.5K per year versus 175K per year, the well-being, the sense of well-being is almost the same. And the same if you go the other way down. If you're earning less than 15K or 15K, it's you have a lower self well-being. It's your the sense is not there. And as you go down, it's going lower. So I'm seeing something in the chat box. There's an anonymous who said yes. Um, the Dr. Abdullah is saying it eases the path to happiness. It's a complementary thing to certain people. For example, Alia, who is money, or the sense of money is a tool. As I am hearing now from you, it's more as a tool. It can provide you happiness, but it doesn't mean that it would contribute to your well-being status. So now we will go to the boring part, or how doctors do usually define happiness. And what do you think, doctors, when you talk to a doctor, what do you think he or how he will define happiness? We have defined happiness from the Merriam-Webster. We didn't define it from any other way. So just can you tell us, what do you think is the definition that doctors may think of when it comes to happiness? Okay, happiness chemicals and hormones, that's true. Endorphins, and for example, being healthy, that's true. Yes. Doctors want you to be always healthy, right? So if you're healthy, then you're happy. So it's mutually exclusive. That's what I'm hearing from you. Does that mean if you're healthy, you're happy? And if you're happy, you're healthy? So is it the other way around? If you're happy, are you healthy? I would like to hear that from you. Let's see what doctors usually do. Doctors are usually looking into healing people. Okay, so putting people out of their misery, putting people out of their feeling that miserable state of them, and they're trying to heal them up. So usually they are not really concerned about happiness. They're really concerned about you being healthy, about you being out of your pain and misery, about giving you a sense of comfort as much as possible. So, but where does happiness and health really cross paths? The definition by the WHO, which is the World Health Organization, defines health per se as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So there is the sense of well-being, but when we look at health, it's a package having the physical, mental, and social well-being. Do you think doctors, when you go and visit them, do they focus on one area over the other area? Have you ever met a doctor that is really focusing on the social well-being part? As we just looked at the definition before a while, they're looking only at the healing part. And this is where the physical and the mental part may be playing a role. But have you ever met a doctor where they were really interested about the social part, or they're really interested directly or indirectly about the mental part? If you're going to a dentist, do you think he is well aware about your mental well-being? If you're going to an eye doctor and an eye specialist, is he really looking at your mental well-being? So these are things I would love to hear from you in the Q&A box, if that is something that you have encountered. But if you go back a bit and you looked at it, well-being is a big umbrella term. And since Ms. Nof is here, they would be talking more about that sense, because let's be honest, doctors are not in the field of happiness. They are not really having the grasp of being in that field. And in a while, you will see that. but they are looking at the general over sense of well-being, which includes happiness and life satisfaction. So when did we see that happiness and health came to that part? It started in the 1980s, and they have started to look at that. While Harvard started promoting the part of getting the biology of emotion, having that emotional part, and really looking at it. Does emotion really bring happiness? Does it make people live longer? Usually people who live longer are more healthier, but that's what they started to look at that. And in 2011, they have looked at how people could live longer, and the research that they thought about. They looked at heart disease, they looked at diabetes, they looked at depression, and they looked at a couple of things to think about happiness and how does doctors or maybe healthcare professionals would think about some personal attributes that would make people or the biology of being happy and healthy at the same time. And there's the sense of hopefulness and engagement. Maybe we didn't mention that hopefulness is one part when we were talking about happiness. And there's the sense of optimism and the sense of having a network of family and friends. This is where the articles, they really tend to do that. Can you be happy and lonely at the same time? Now, the research is much more conflicting, but lonely people are not healthy people, and they have lots of struggles, and they have lots of issues with mental well-being. So they attribute loneliness and they correlate it with poor health for an instant. But could you see lonely people or introverted people who are happy? This is where we are trying to look at that part. And there is a concept that Harvard have mentioned, and I haven't seen it back and forth, that is delved into the medical field, which is being good at self-regulating yourself. Have you mentioned this self-regulation? Is that when you are in a stressful challenge, or you know that something that is coming up that is not nice, an exam, for example, or something of that sort. So you self-regulate yourself and not get into the dooming part or the gray part of things and thinking about, oh yes, I am going to be depressed, I'm not going to be happy, this is coming, and you go through that ruminating, that kind of thing. But there is that self-regulation in among yourself, that this is a period of time that we will go through to, and then nothing will stay at the same stage, and it will go throughout, and your outlook is different. So this is what the Harvard mentions about this. Now, Dr. Abdullah really have brought up how we teach students about patients' feelings, and I will get to that in a bit. So, feelings sometimes, maybe we doctors are very well perceptors, and if you know this about doctors and healthcare professionals, they are shrewd when it comes to having the perceptions. But the way we treat or the way we are put into medical professionals, we are always really informing doctors in one way or the others to look at one part, and we will get to that in a while. But going back to the research that we mentioned, that happiness and health is usually supported by a correlation. It's not a causative agent, it is correlated. If you're happy and healthy, there is a correlation. And they have seen that, for example, happier people, they have happier hearts, in which they are not getting more heart attacks. They are better when their blood pressure doesn't spike up higher up. They usually don't get their immune function or their immunity is better, typically is doing better. And they have done this on rats, and they have looked at also people who are happier in general, usually don't get, for example, upper respiratory tract infections. They usually are happier people. They are usually engaging in healthier behaviors. They're usually in a physical, they are usually physically active, and they're usually taking care of themselves, and they usually live longer. So as you can see, research are coming bits and pieces from other places and looking at how happiness really contributes to that. Now, if you're a doctor or if you're a psychologist, you know that there are Oxford handbooks, and usually people cherish these Oxford handbooks, and they go and they looked after for that, and they are usually used as references. And in 2013, the Oxford, as the publishers, have published the first book on happiness, and the Oxford Happiness, and it's a thick book. It's over 300 or 400 pages, or maybe more, maybe, if I'm not mistaken. And there is a section in that book, which is section 2, that they looked at only the definition of happiness. And the definition of happiness, again, it is very difficult in 2013 up to the latest edition of the book. It didn't mention any specific definition of happiness when it comes to psychologists and what they came to us as a consensus, but it's an umbrella term where well-being, subjective of well-being, feeling psychologically well-being, health is one part of that. So health is a component of being happy, if that's to be said. So we saw the scale before. Do you think doctors use the scale? Please mention it in the chat box. If you have seen the scale at the doctor's visit or somewhere, so doctors don't use the scale. Dr. Abdullah, we'd like to see if you have encountered the scales maybe at the doctor's visits or as probably with teaching students to really rely on the scale somewhere. No. So actually, I don't want to disappoint you both, but this is it is in a different format. This is a very common scale. If you go to any emergency department, or even if you ask your doctors to open their medical records or open their notes, you will see this kind of chart, which is similar to the chart we saw above, right? Actually, I'm not sure which one came before or the other, but this chart was introduced in 1983, before I was born. And they have produced this chart to make it's for rating pain, and it's widely used by nurses and doctors and healthcare professionals to really, if patients are not expressive, they can see the scale. And as you can see, 0, where the patient is looking comfortable and happy. And you can see number 2, which is basically the green scale, hurts a little bit. So do you agree with number 2 that this face looks like you're hurting a little bit? So please tell me if you're agreeing with the scale or not. But this scale is available among many places if you are looking at that. If you go to your doctor and you will see that if hurting a little bit is something of that sort, then that's okay. So now when you're looking at doctors, also psychologists look at the Oxford, and they have this happiness questionnaire that they do distribute, and it's a self-reporting questionnaire, and it has multiple parameters. And basically this questionnaire, the Oxford Happiness Questionnaire, it is basically looking at psychological well-being, not happiness. If you look at the deep definition, it's looking at the psychological well-being itself. So it's not a happiness scale or a questionnaire, but it's deemed to be mentioned as a happiness questionnaire. But there's lots of different outtakes on that. As you can see, this is a very late article that was published 2 years ago that is saying that there are invariances among the happiness scales, and it's totally different between genders and marital status. And they have looked at the validity and the reliability of the scales among of it together. Actually, In 2020, the Forbes magazine had mentioned that it turns out that we don't really know how to measure happiness. And you can listen to this article freely. It's 4 minutes if you don't want to read the full article. And they have looked at different articles, and they have mentioned when it comes to healthcare, probably we are not doing our best job in really measuring quoting happiness. And this is really difficult. But if I take it a bit back and looked at, okay, there is or a psychological well-being skills, referring back to the Harvard School of Public Health, they have mentioned certain repositories of skills, as we can see, six or more, or five or more, about having the psychological well-being scale among them, which is the Oxford Happiness Scale. So there are six, and one of them is life satisfaction, and the other one is a personality scale. So it's not per se really targeting psychological well-being. One of them is about your quality of life, and the other one is about personality. But when we are looking at depression, for example, there are over 30 instruments which are reliable and valid and are being used by doctors, physicians, and the rest. What do you think about that? So, do you think when it comes to depression, for example, and I'm not saying depression is the opposite sense of happiness, but typically people who are not happy, they are unhappy, and they could be going through. And if you are unhappy, if you are depressed when it comes to the medical field, that is a really unpleasant feeling, and a really horrible feeling to be depressed. There's over 30 instruments, but when it comes to well-being, exactly, Alia, Doctora, or Miss Ali was saying, it's a personality disorder, so it's studied more and to find accurate. But why do you think, Alia, we are not discussing well-being and happiness and studying it more and having more robust and valid skills to be looked at? So I'm not sure, maybe Dr. Abdullah and the rest and the other participant can tell us. But going back to that, let's see what the medical researchers or medical doctors really research on happiness. So this is where I'm trying to really get into, is that when we are, if somebody is familiar with PubMed, it is basically the Google for medical doctors. If you want to know any research, you just log on PubMed as one of these search engines, research engines. When it comes to happiness and any research when it comes to happiness, you can see around 22,000 results in the last century, for example, that is related to happiness, and what is the medical field looking into happiness through PubMed, basically. But when it goes to looking at unhappiness, which is a good thing, it's much more or less. It's around 9,000 entries, or 9,000 entries. So as Alia was mentioning, it's very difficult to define happiness. But is it easier to define um, let's say, depression versus happiness? Why are we focusing on the gloomy side? Why depression is much more easier to be defined than happiness? Because that is also a general state where depression is not happy. And Dr. Abdullah, you are a doctor in our eyes, either or. So we are very glad to have you here, Dr. Abdullah. So let's go to depression. You can see over 500,000, almost 600,000 results are there when it comes to the research. So doctors are also more driven to talk about depression and anxiety rather than to look at happiness. So is it because the skills are better, or because doctors are looking at the part of healing as the part of their package? This is where we are coming at. We are looking at how we can make people feel better. So what we are faced with is depression. So once I see a state of a person being unhappy and depressed, then I have to bring him back to a stage where it is somehow better. But when you're happy or getting to that stage, maybe it's not of an interest to doctors, maybe, but maybe to some other researchers, which we are not capturing. And maybe that's where doctors need to look at the other side of the coin, because they're looking at only one side of the coin. And definitely this is what we are looking for. And Dr. Abdullah, depression has signs and symptoms. Why can't we define, for example, for happiness, some signs and symptoms? It is quite, I know it, we are trying to, and I totally agree with you, Alia. Sadness and depression is separate from happiness, and it's not a total opposite or an antonym. And they have their specific areas. But what I'm saying is there is one area that is heavily promoted for. Why can't we look and we approach depression? It didn't come out of nowhere. So when doctors and researchers looked at, they have grouped these people, they have looked at what they have looked at, and they have put them at the scale, and they have addressed them in a way that could be manageable in signs, symptoms, scales, assessments, and providing for them the tools and happiness. But when it comes to happiness, still there is, I do believe there is, this generation will look into it more and will discuss it more, and how we define happiness. What is the state of happiness? The definition is not quite yet well defined. What are the signs and symptoms? Some people look at it as spirituality, like in southern India, but in the same country, they're looking at a different way. What makes me happy is totally different than what makes you happy. So, but when it comes to depression, everybody knows when somebody, or doctors, you can define when you're depressed, and you can define yourself when you're happy. But it's quite interesting to see that happiness is a different state. Now, in 2020, there is an article that said, does happiness improve health? So if you're in a constant state of being happy, does it improve of your constant health? So what do you think the article would say, or would really say? Well, basically, they looked at different things, and they have said that we cannot think that there is, if you are happy, your health is better, in a sense that your health will become much, 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 much more better. Now, there is, as you can see, there is also conflicting data coming from there and from here and there. They have done it on a 6-month period. They have looked at it in one area of the world. They looked at adults only. They looked at us only at a few number of participants. So all of this to keep in mind that, yes, if you are happy, you have better health outcomes. But if you're happy, will it make your better health outcome the best? This is yet to be discovered, and this is yet to be really addressed in a very scientific matter, which I am not aware of. If you have any research, please keep it up. So now we came to the end of our presentation. And how do you want doctors to address happiness? So by that, I just want to end the presentation, and I would like to hear from you and hear from anyone. Do you think that I made it? Do you think that this is what you came to listen for? Were you thinking that I will be talking about serotonin, oxytocin, prefrontal cortex, the brain and its areas? Or do you want us as doctors to really address your happiness as far and foremost? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sara, for this engaging conversation that we had today. And before jumping to taking questions, I would also share that when we were studying with Martin Seligman, you've summarized all the research in the model that he came up with, which is called PERMA model. And he thinks that there are 5 elements as a basic construct for overall well-being: positive emotion, engagement, meaning, achievement, and positive relationship. And also, I think that the study that Harvard did, the longitudinal study, the 75 years old, but that was 4 years ago, so it's more than 75 now. I think it also gives us a huge perception about we can experience not happier, but we can experience more positive emotions if we have healthier relationship. The health aspect, though, which is very interesting, is that when you think about it, there are some people with certain disability, people with determination, right? They seem to be more content. They seem to be more satisfied with their life than us who are representation of being healthier individuals. So it's a very interesting debate, I would say.
It is. It's an interesting, and there is a wide variety of, as you can see, there is the self-optimism. I think it's a construct of the human being, and there is the genetic part that we're still tackling. Maybe
Yeah.
it's the way that they're formed, their genetic part, and their environmental influences that the report have mentioned, maybe are shaping them to look differently, and the optimism, and maybe they have healthier relationships. So it's always, even as I just mentioned, can introverts be happy? They don't have typically healthy relationship or close relationships with multiple people, but could they be happy and content? I don't know. This is yet to be discovered. But I mean, it's interesting. It might be one time we would be really gathering all the participants, and we would be sitting with them and discussing more with them, and see. And I would really love to hear their voices, if they are able to discuss this topic more.
Of course. And you know, subhanallah, even defining happiness among medical professional individuals, the way how they interact, the way how they represent themselves also matter, and reflect on their patients. I remember I went to one of the governmental entities, one of the governmental clinic, and the doctor didn't had an eye contact with me. I was so tired. I had fever, and she didn't look at me, and she was just typing, and then she said, "Okay, go and do PCR test. Period. That's it." Versus wanting to see a dermatologist, she came to the room and she started talking to me as if she knew me years ago. "Hi, Nof, this is our first time seeing you. So tell me, how can I help you today?" And she sat, and there was interaction. There was really a very comfortable setup in general. And after that visit, I went back home and I thought, maybe we should teach our medical students emotional intelligence. But then I realized there's one of the courses that are taught to our medical students in UAE. It touches upon something relates to emotional intelligence. And I think it's really very important and very crucial.
Yes, the new curricula really addresses when it comes to patient bedside manners, as we say it, or yeah. So we have to look at that, but also we have to think about, if you're not happy, you cannot project happy feelings to others.
Of course, how do they take care of their own well-being?
Yes, so we have to. I mean, I'm not defending the doctor, but if you have paperwork to be done, or a very complicated system in front of you, so you have to complete that. To progress to somewhere else.
Sure.
Maybe they. This is the debate that we have all the time. That should we let doctors come and perform, even if they're not doing well? Although there are some certain studies. I'm not saying certain studies, but for example, when doctors have lack of sleep, they perform worse.
Oh,
so,
yeah. In any
yeah,
professional, I would say.
Yeah, they perform worse, and that is also in a verbal manner and non-verbal manners. They perform worse. So, for example, if a doctor is always busy or not being able to sleep, so they will be definitely performing less. So there was a very huge debate. If we let doctors take a day off then who will be seeing really patients who would really take care of the nation? So these are things that we need to have a perfect balance, because as you said, nobody likes to come to the doctor and they're very happy. I've never seen anyone going to the doctor. Even if you go, I think there was a survey, certain people went to a plastic surgeon to do some enhancements to themselves. Like if you're going to a plastic surgeon, you're supposed to be not sad and depressed. You're going there to with the perception that you would like to enhance a part of yourself. But even those patients who went to plastic surgeons or cosmetic dermatologists, there's a sense of anxiety just sitting in that room. You just mentioned, as a dermatologist, you're there to because you're always anticipating the worst coming out of the doctor's visit, right? Yeah, you're anticipating the worst that is coming. So these are the things that we are dealing with. Every profession is dealing with something. So I hope I have answered some of the concerns there.
There are a couple of comments, Doctora, if you would like to go over them.
Yeah, I think Ali has been, thank you, Ali, for being very much engaging with us throughout this presentation. I hope I can see you in person. Ironically, people who know misery and sadness also know happiness. So this is a concept I think, Alia, you should read. I mean, I have the presentation have looked at Asian countries, and Asian countries, specifically Japan. And one of those, you know, the definitions of happiness, there's one paper that I kept. In Japan, they would like to see, you know, you have seen the yin and the yang,
the model
to it's I don't know, it's a circle with half black, half white, and there is within the black a white dot. And basically the Japanese have a concept that you have to know both ends to appreciate both ends. So as Alia mentioned, people who know misery and sadness would really appreciate happiness and know them much better. So you have to go, I think, to the extreme to that part. Now there is also Dr. Or Miss Moza, thank you so much for your comment. Dr. Abdullah have mentioned that there is some part of spirituality. As Muslims, we believe happiness comes from God by obeying Him. To achieve happiness, we have to be content with what we have, whether we went through gain or loss. There's a lot of correlation between spirituality, being well-being, and all of that. And this is a separate topic by itself. And yes, and Dr. Abdullah, yin and yang, that's the concept that you have to think about both sides of the article. So Huda Tarish, thank you so much for your comment. I think we have answered them all. And I'm so glad that Ms. Nof and your team, and for the great work that you are doing at the center and the Center of Happiness, and for really shedding the light on these topics and bringing us all together to discuss topics like that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sara. And this comes to the end of today's session, which is an invitation for you also to come again and have really in-person discussion about happiness, concept of happiness and well-being. And it might be simple, yet a little bit complicated, but there isn't any one definite definition for what makes us happy, what promotes well-being. It differs from one person to another. But we really hope you guys have benefited from today's session. For UAEU staff, please don't forget to sign up in the link. Thank you everyone for engaging today. And we will upload today's session on our YouTube channel, inshallah. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.